I just made a few slides for this. And so I want to talk really briefly to update on the resources for progressives that we've started. I want to talk briefly about labor unions, the key group for endorsements, and then why some progressives may oppose our carbon fee and dividend bill, and then about carbon fee and dividend as part of an infrastructure bill and carbon fee and dividend as part of a budget reconciliation bill. So that's what I have in mind. And let me change. Okay, cool. All right. So we do have resources for progressives. We have a link at the home page of the Progressive Outreach Action page. You click on that, you'll go to a Google Doc that has an annotated index of all the progressive documents that have been uploaded onto our site. And we still need a few more on some topics. The annotated index has a few sentences to tell you what it's about in case that's something you want to read. And then you can click directly on it and it will open up that document. So I couldn't use all the file system in Community, although those files are still there in Community. But we now have a couple of dozen documents, including a rather interesting, sophisticated one on the border adjustment. Okay, so any questions about the resources for progressives? It's really straightforward.
Looks good.
Okay, the second thing, I wanted to just bring this up because we did have a meeting a few weeks ago with a progressive member of Congress. And the staffer was very open, trying to think about, well, what strategy should CCL take? And one of the attendants asked, okay, what individuals or organizations would this member of Congress want to hear from about this? And she took it to, well, let's think about it as what the entire what congressmen are concerned about. And the only group she mentioned was labor unions. Apparently, and it makes a lot of sense. So that is a group that that she identified as important. And if you look further, I mean, President Biden did the landmark executive order on climate that he came out with, setting up all of those positions and all of those task forces. One of the 6 objectives was, quote, spurs well-paying union jobs and economic growth. And if you look at any of the progressive climate plans in the House, and there are several that have been developed, and there was a climate unity task force that was a cooperative between Biden and Bernie Sanders during the election, chaired by John Kerry and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And one of its statements of purpose was all jobs in the clean energy economy should provide an opportunity to join a union. And as I've worked to prepare a talk on the Democrats' plans for climate this session, finding what information I could, I did run across unions repeatedly. Okay, so is there anyone here who works with unions who would like to share anything else about this? We have a member who isn't here tonight, Alan. I would hope he would make it, but I don't know whether any of the rest of you work with unions and have any insights on that. Harry?
Well, I don't work with unions personally, but I am one of the leaders of the CCL Labor Outreach Action Team, which people should feel welcome to check out if they're interested in how to work with unions. We've just had a change in leadership. Dave Masson was the founder of that group, and he led us for many years, and he's now retiring from his active role in CCL. And we have two new leaders, Linda and John, who have bravely stepped up to fill Dave's shoes. But we have a lot of history of having meetings with union locals wherever people live, and also trying to develop language specifically about what happens to fossil fuel workers when fossil fuel industries shut down. And that's of most relevance to places that are heavily dependent on that as part of their economy. But I think many unions around the country are sort of, as a point of solidarity, are concerned about what happens to fossil fuel workers. So I would just encourage everyone to check out that action team on CCL Community if you're interested.
Okay, and if you have any documents that we could put onto our list, just go to the site and upload them into the files, and I check that every now and then. And when I see it there, I'll put it into our annotated bibliography of stuff. So if you don't, that's fine. But if you do, that might be useful for some people, since that does seem to be really important for progressives. Okay, anyone else?
Peter, I'll take a look.
Yeah, I just want to mention that I had a conversation with Gene Karpinski, who's the head of the League of Conservation Voters, last week. And he told me that Biden will be presenting a big speech within the next week on infrastructure, which will include his climate change plans, if I'm not mistaken. And just so you know, the leader of this very progressive organization advised us, CCL, to get behind it, really get behind it, and to be publicly visible behind Biden's efforts, whether or not there's a carbon tax in there, but not to be carping that there might not be. So I'd like to pass that along. I've passed it along to Mark, and I think that the organization needs to support President Biden, whatever his climate plan is, which I know will be very pro-union as well.
Yes. Okay, very good. I know. Okay. All right, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Okay, the next topics, let's see, let me look at my thing. Okay, why some progressives may oppose the EICDA, which has been a continued topic for obvious reasons. And I wanted to do this slide first. I'm not going to go through it all, but you'll notice that these three groups constitute 212 of 221 of the Democratic members. The Blue Dog Democrats say nothing about climate, but the House New Democrats have a very strong pro-worker, pro-business, price signal, market orientation in their statement about climate, which is very much in line with what we have. And the Progressive Caucus also has a strong impact. And in order to get anything passed without Republican support, we're going to need almost everybody. It's a very thin majority, but I believe it would be easier to get most of the Blue Dog Democrats than it would be to get hardly any of the senators to be behind this. So the Progressive Caucus are self-identified progressives, and there's a bunch of them. And I'm just going to share what they say any price on a carbon scheme must have. must be consistent with environmental, and this is directly from it, practically quote by quote. I had to trim it down a little bit, but these are exact words. Be consistent with environmental and economic justice principles, augment binding environmental regulations and zero carbon performance. And of course, that would make the regulatory pause not fit. Stop air, water, and land pollution at the source. Use revenues to benefit frontline communities and workers. And that's also a problem with our bill at this point to this group. Cause no unfair burden to any population without economic support to rectify it. And we do well there. And be crafted with input from frontline communities, workers, and other stakeholders. Okay, so those are the positions. Now, I want to note that this is what they have as their official preferred carbon scheme, but the actual process of passing a law includes a lot of horse trading, sausage making, deals. And it's worth noting that 35% of the members of the Congressional Progressive Caucus co-sponsored the EICDA last year. So even many who would prefer these things may well choose, if they feel this is one of the best things they can get passed, to support it. Okay, but I wanted to go ahead and put these up. And now I'm going to stop sharing and see if anyone wishes to make any comments, or you may want me to go back so you can see the list for comments. Either way is fine, but go ahead. Anyone want to make any comments about?
Yeah, go back, bring it back up. Bring up the.
Okay.
Sorry, I was in the shower and I was listening, but I couldn't comment earlier. I like on frozen Lake Superior. It is beautiful right now, and it doesn't happen very often, but it was glass smooth there for a while. So I think we do better on some of this stuff than a clean electricity standard, which is kind of where the progressives seem to be gravitating toward. And you know, I don't need, if we don't need to go over things one by one, then I'll just stop it at that. But is there, yeah, I'm not sure what the most.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that because I saw the stuff on the strategic action team, the CCL strategic action team about the Clean Environment Standard. And I am a leader in the Sierra Club in Texas. I have read everything they've put out on climate. There's never been anything about that. So I'm not sure who is behind it, but I think it's a pretty, there's no major groups I'm aware of. Now, some of the fundamental pieces of it, which is basically, you say, in a way it's similar to cap and trade. You say you will achieve it by this time, and by this date, you have to have this much done. And then there's various mechanisms to enforce that you have, say, 40% clean energy of electricity in 2025 and 60% in 2030 and so forth. But I am not so sure that's the you know, what I have read far more about carbon pricing among the administration and congressmen that I have seen about that. So I just wanted to make that note. It could be coming, but I haven't seen it yet. Any other comments anyone would like to make?
Yeah, Peter here.
I can't see your hand, so just jump in.
Will you make these view graphs available?
Yes, I had a request to record this, so I'll go ahead and put it onto the whole recording. And then when I do my regional presentation, this one is on that. It's along with some other stuff on the different parts of the Democrats.
I'd like to make a point that it's an issue of market competitiveness also. My dad told me that China has a price on carbon, and they are, pushing the technology to be carbon neutral. So it's a matter of national security and economic development to have a price on carbon, to drive innovation, and to compete with other countries that are already taking these steps.
Yes.
Right. So Peter here, your point number 4 on the Congressional Progressive Caucus slide, use revenues to benefit frontline communities and workers. I think that's a very important point to clarify and understand with the environmental justice community. I know there are a lot of members of Congress who have said, if you want me to support what you are advocating, you need to get the environmental justice community to tell me to support what you're advocating, and they do not. They do not support per capita revenue return, 100% revenue return, where rich people and poor people all get the same check. And so I'm confused about this. The lessons from the 2 failed initiatives in Washington State, I think, are illustrative. And we need to really understand what they're talking about when they say use revenues to benefit frontline communities and workers. Because my question is, are some of these environmental justice groups wanting funds from the government, from these revenues, to go to these groups where they will go and help workers in frontline communities? I mean, what does it mean to benefit frontline communities and workers? Is it government programs? Is it checks in the mail?
It's government programs, and it is in almost all of the progressive documents and even the Biden documents, and it has to do with projects for climate resilience, projects for infrastructure, but you bias it to hiring the workers from frontline communities. You bias it towards projects that benefit like you don't do a flood control project for the $1 million district in Houston, which is what the state of Texas would tend to do, but you go to where there are lower income people, and that's our top priority, not the other.
So the people living in the middle and upper middle classes who are paying more for everything, not just gasoline, but bread and everything, they're not seeing any benefit, but it's going to lower income groups, which is fine, it's justice, but how do you keep their political support when they're listening to Fox News? That's the question, and that's the problem, I think. The political durability of this, when it's targeted, drops precipitously, and that's where it's so vulnerable, even with Rush Limbaugh gone.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
I do. I'm going to let someone else respond before I talk more.
I see some heads nodding.
I'll tell
I'll
you.
jump. Good.
Luis.
I researched how the cap and trade bill was killed back then, some years ago.
Yeah.
What happened was Myron Ebell and the Competitive Enterprise Institute did a dog and pony show in rural America, and they took balloons and popcorn, and they took that crazy guy from England who's no scientist but pretends to be, and they went around to all the small towns.
Moncton, Lord Moncton.
Talked to them, and they did rah rallies. So a reason I'm saying that is we need to go to rural areas and we need to talk. That's what I think.
Okay.
I
Thoughts?
have a question about you mentioned the regulatory pause in item number 2 there. With Trump getting rid of a lot of those regulations, and now Biden putting them back in, I think it's going to get very difficult for organizations like Sierra Club and 350.org, EDF, NRDC, to get behind something that's going to pause the EPA from regulating greenhouse gases.
You're absolutely right. The Sierra Club will not support anything that has a regulatory pause. They don't even want the of stopping regulations, because as they see it, I think accurately, regulations have cleaned our water, our air, protected our wildlife, our parks, and without them, and they allowed the Sierra Club to stop about 100 changes that the Trump EPA tried to make early in the administration. And so, no, you're right. This is the Progressive Caucus, and they're in line with that, but it is, yeah. So I'm talking too much again. Let me let other people respond. David?
Just a comment on that regulation pause. My understanding was put in there to make it possible for Republicans to support our bill, and not a single Republican in the House supported our bill. So I think we get rid of it. It didn't do any good if it was supposed to make it easier for Republicans to support the bill. Where the hell were they? No, not a single one came to support that bill. I think we get rid of that regulation pause.
I'd like to respond to a lot of these issues. One, on the last one, I've been attending as a state coordinators meeting, and then the strategic planning meeting, and I'm sensing a real sea change in the CCL policy. For one thing, I think they're hearing us on the regulatory pause, and they're also recognizing that the goal of the last year and a half of supporting a particular piece of legislation was probably not the best approach because of the issues that particularly those on the left have raised regarding, and it didn't work with the Republicans. What is also critical, though, is that they're not even saying now that we should focus on carbon fee and dividend, but should be talking more, still using carbon fee and dividend as what we're really asking for, but talking also about carbon tax and pollution payments and broader things to get a broader perspective. But probably of most importance in the discussions I've been hearing so far is that given what's happening in Congress now, trying to pass, a very specific bill like the EICDA is very problematic because, it will require a 60% majority, whereas policies that impose carbon taxes or fees and then distributed the money through other existing mechanisms could be passed on through the budget reconciliation process, which only requires 50% approval. So what this is telling me, particularly as someone from a very liberal state who is trying to lobby with liberal progressive representative who have no objection to the idea of a tax on carbon or a fee on carbon, but also don't want to isolate specific, moving those monies towards specific goals, including whether it's research or also most impacted communities, more so than what our household study would indicate, that CCL National is at a point where now they are sort of encouraging us to reach out to these other options so that, I mean, absolutely we want to see a price on carbon. Ideally, we'd like to see bipartisan support. Ideally, we think that equal distribution among all households is the most durable solution. But all of those things put together, the most important thing is that we get something passed now. And if we can put a price on carbon and include distribution of those funds to things that say were present in the Sanders-Boxer bill of 2006, I think it was, or no, I'm sorry, 2014, I think it was. But where it's essentially, putting a fee on carbon, but not this blanket equal distribution to all people can help bring us more in line with the equal justice and more left-leaning groups have objected to. So I would say really stay tuned, because I think there's going to be some important things coming out before our March lobby days, indicating this real shift in direction. And I would attribute a lot of that to the influence that the folks on this group and the more progressive elements of the of CCL have sort of leaned on national to say, our initial policy was a great ideal, but it probably is not going to fly at that level at this time.
That's great, thanks. Tom, I agree with you. And you'll note the Coons-Feinstein bill in the Senate was much closer to these principles than our bill, although it is very, very similar to it in general. Okay, so someone else want to speak before we leave this topic?
Are there any considerations about giving dividends only to the bottom 2 quintiles instead of all 5 quintiles?
That's what the Coons-Feinstein bill did.
Yeah.
That, to me, that makes much more sense. I'm certainly not I certainly don't need any money coming from the government, but if we could give a bigger dividend to those people that are most affected by pollution where they work and live, I think that would make much more sense, just to do the bottom 2 quintiles and let it go at that.
Yeah.
This is Peter. Can I comment?
Briefly, go ahead.
I think it's a disaster to eliminate the middle class from the revenue distribution. I can see not giving it to the top 1% or the top 10%, but the middle class, you got to keep them in, or this bill will not last.
Yeah, and Peter, the people, when they say to benefit frontline communities and workers, it actually benefits the middle class as well. It's just biased towards, instead of the usual, against that group, but it does include projects in all the communities that affect all the people. So I just wanted to clarify that when they say that use it to benefit frontline communities and workers, they really mean not all of the revenues, but make sure they're covered.
Let me comment. You mentioned that the regulatory pause, that actually was never part of CCL's proposal, as far as I know. It was part of the sausage making that came out of Congress. And I think that goes back to we jumped on the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act and pushed that. But I like your idea of just supporting bills that move things ahead here, rather than focusing on a particular bill that has something that actually is probably not going to get enough support.
What I heard Danny saying, if I can, just briefly, is something that my member of Congress really liked to hear, which was We want a bill that will cut carbon emissions drastically by 2030 and totally by 2050. Second, it needs to protect low and middle income Americans from any economic harm. And thirdly, we need something that lasts longer than 2 years. Those three things. So I don't care, we don't care if it's carbon fee and dividend or whatever, but we think carbon fee and dividend is probably the best way to get that done.
Last time I listened to Danny Richter speak, he said we're willing, we're up, the bill is up for picking and modifying and so forth, but we have two things we will never give up on. And one of them is that it must cut emissions and it must protect the lowest 40% of the income people.
Yes.
Those are the two, just two. All the rest of them are.
Yeah, what about the government is giving checks that are means tested to a bunch of people now? Why can't those same people be getting the dividend? It's already figured out. Like
Yeah,
I
Medicare
didn't get a check, but we did. I mean, because it's going to the middle and lower classes economically, but not people who are too rich to get it.
That's easy to do.
It is. So, I mean, why can't we could do that? That would be easy. It's in place how to do it. So, that's
and of course, go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Louise. Are you?
Yeah, I have a question. I was listening to someone talk about environmental justice issues and saying, we don't want handouts. We want jobs. We want to contribute to society. And the thing that I have been saying about the EICDA is that that this will create jobs. And I don't see any, I would like to see some really good research on how many jobs and how these different plans are creating jobs.
Remy.
So,
did that.
yeah, it's Beth. I just wanted to say this might be a really good time for my 30-second announcement, Bob, because we have, I'm part of the Braver Angels Action Team, and we have a speaker coming in March, Dr. Andy Hoffman. He's spoken at CCL before, and he speaks about how to build trust between these different groups on these issues and try to find common ground. So I'm going to put his information in the chat. We'd love to have anybody on the Progressive Action Team come and join us. And we'll also post it on the Action Team Leaders page, Bob, if you want to share it.
Okay, well, thank you, Beth. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move us to the next slide. If we really want to come back to this, we can. There's some other rather interesting things that we could talk all night about. So let's take a quick look. I just want to share, they are working on the infrastructure bill. It will include the climate provisions. President Biden has made that very clear. He says our environment and our economy are completely and totally connected. And several analysts have said that for President Biden, his jobs plan is his climate plan, and his climate plan is his jobs plan. And of course, the House and the Senate will work with Biden to design it, but there is going to be a lot of sausage making. The process of getting a bill includes, some people want one thing and some people want another, and sometimes a key group will say, well, if you put this in it, then our group will support it, but if you don't, we want, and it won't. And so there's going to be a lot of shifts. Now I met, and two other people here met with a progressive member of Congress staffer, and she told us that she didn't think carbon fee and dividend could pass as a standalone bill, but she thought it could pass as a part of the infrastructure bill. And she recommended that CCL consider that strategy. So the infrastructure bill could be a key component. And of course, as we all know, there's some advocates for price on carbon in the White House among the experts. Now I'm going to go ahead and jump to my last slide, and then we can talk about anything we want. If the Republicans refuse to play, refuse to pass anything serious,
You're not going to.
which they have in the past, then there is the possibility of the budget reconciliation bill. And I did listen to an interview of two Senate staffers, one of whom was the chief staffer for the Energy Committee, working on several budget reconciliation bills. And it was very interesting. Briefly, the Budget Committee says, this is how much we'll spend and this is how much revenue we have to get. And now you, Energy Committee, you have to spend this much and no more. The Tax Committee, you have to create this much revenue. And then it goes to those committees to develop it. Now, as you know, when the thing is finished, it's presented to the Senate, and then the parliamentarian rules on the, uses the Byrd rules. Unfortunately, you don't get a second chance. Once the budget reconciliation is presented, if you fail the Byrd rules, your section is completely gone. It can no longer be a part of the budget reconciliation bill. So you as a staffer designing the bill, you don't include anything that might throw the whole section out. The carbon, and they specifically said, carbon fee and dividend and the border adjustment, they could easily be written to fail the Byrd rules, but they also could be easily written to pass the Byrd rules if people know what they're doing. The regulatory pause very likely wouldn't survive because no regulations can be set in the bill or changed. And the clean energy standard that was mentioned earlier, they specifically mentioned and said they could not imagine how it could be designed so it could survive. It would be an entirely new program. It would have an incidental impact on revenue. And although he saw a document by someone he really respects saying they thought it could, he couldn't see how that would happen. So if we have to go to the budget reconciliation process, then we're back to the problem of making sure we get all 50 senators, from the progressives to the more conservatives, such as Manchin and the Arizona senator, which just slipped my mind. So I just wanted to share that, and now I'm gonna stop sharing the screen so I can see everybody's faces, and we can just talk about any of this that we wish.
It seems like Joe Manchin is a key person here because he's the chairman of the Senate Energy Committee. And it seems like any bill related to climate change is going to have to go through that committee.
That's correct. And I've done some research, and he says that he would support a carbon price if it had plenty of provisions for his co-workers, that they would get first dibs on the new clean energy technology jobs. And he also says he doesn't want to sacrifice West Virginia if China and India aren't doing anything. And so those are the two major concerns that he has. So in the sausage making process, but you're right, this person said the chairs of the key committees, and that includes him. It also includes Bernie Sanders as the chair of the Budget Committee. And so we have the most progressive and the least progressive senators in being at the two key roles for carbon fee and dividend, which is ironic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, that was kind of the point that I was trying to make before, that I mean, you know, without telling tales out of private sessions, I mean, something like that, Bernie would absolutely be behind, and he would also, I would guess, be willing to make compromises, even to mention, in order to, you know, sweeten the deal down there. So I'm very optimistic about this approach of going through budget reconciliation, and that would trim off all of the other garbage that the rest of us have so much problem with the
That's right.
the you know, the regulatory stuff and everything else. Is okay, but instead of just distributing the money equally to everybody, okay, we set up some sort of process like they did on the COVID, you know, relief bill, whatever they choose, but it's clean. It doesn't necessarily have the staying power as one of the others, but I think when enough people start getting checks in the mail, I think it really makes up for that, and I sense that CCL National is kind of ready to go in this direction as well. So I'm very positively encouraged.
So this is Peter. We've got some lobbying coming up pretty soon, and I'm not sure what we're lobbying for, because Ted Deutsch hasn't released the next version of his bill, right? We don't know what's in it. And yet I think we're being asked to urge our members of Congress to support whatever he comes up with, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm not sure how we can do that.
That's not true. That's what I'm trying to say. What I've heard just this week from National is they're asking us to have a much broader perspective on it, and I'm not even sure if Deutsch came up with the same bill, whether CCL would throw all its weight behind. I think we've maybe realized that was a misstep.
That message sure hasn't gotten out here.
I just heard it this week at state coordinators call and strategy. It hasn't been codified, but that's what I am sensing is the mood at this point. We'll hear a whole lot more in the next month, but
I hope so. I like that.
No.
The Colorado.
Yeah, I don't even feel like making an appointment. Peter's right. We don't know what we're asking for.
Well,
Yeah.
the Colorado state coordinators are trying to set up lobby meetings right now, and they're stressing getting conservatives into the meeting because they're still focused on getting 12 Republican senators to support Energy and Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. So if they're going to change the message here, they got to get it out pretty soon.
You know, I think it's okay to zoom out a little bit and just focus on our core principles: carbon fee, dividend, and border carbon adjustment, which is coming from the EU, right? We have a Secretary of the Treasury and Commerce, or Transportation, I should say, Pete, who favor it. And then the National Academy of Sciences have come out for carbon tax, if I'm not mistaken, and all those 3,600 economists. I still think we have plenty to talk about in our 20 to 30 minutes with our member of Congress without maybe focusing on one specific piece of legislation, which I think has been a millstone around our necks for quite some time, frankly.
I'm going to jump in here.
Most likely. Sorry.
I totally agree. And I have for a while have not been talking about the EICDA to progressive congressmen so much as the base carbon fee and dividend principles, because most of them do not know how progressive some of our provisions are, and they need to know that. And so to me, that education has to be done regardless of what the bill is. So just talking about the progressive pieces of that bill to progressives
Right.
is, I think, really important. Okay, sorry, I'm talking too much.
Totally agree.
So I think
Okay,
something, sorry,
okay, go ahead.
talk to you. So I think something we should be aware of is that the most likely way this is going to go is that it's going to get into budget reconciliation for something. And I was listening to a talk from Joseph Mykut and else, I can't forget his name, but they were thinking that the most likely way that any sort of dividend or any sort of revenue return would be done in budget reconciliation would be through just adjusting the tax code, like reducing taxes in some other area, which, so that might be somewhere where we can apply some pressures that they actually get a real dividend out, which is what we're all pushing for. I also do think that the Coons bill, the Coons-Feinstein bill that we were talking about earlier, something that we could or should end up with if this passes in kind of a normal way. It's like 70% dividends, and I guess that's enough. And that, I mean, that was like spread across the board. It wasn't like as much money as the pure CF&D, but it did seem like enough. And yeah, you can peel off some of that money to like help coal communities. You can peel some of it off for energy efficiency, which would be big as well. So I mean, that kind of seemed like a pretty good bill.
And somebody was talking about educating people was important and showing how progressive our bill could be. Okay, the Pelosi staffer that we've been meeting with lately said that it's really important to make sure our Congress members are not conflating cap and trade with what we're doing, because cap and trade is so not progressive. It's so harmful. I mean, everyone hates it. So we've got to make sure they know that this is carbon fee and dividend. It is not cap and trade. So,
yeah.
It's 8:30. I'm happy to talk longer. If anyone who needs to leave, feel free to. Other comments?
I think the differentiation between cap and trade and carbon tax is so critical. I'm not sure CCL as an organization has made that clear enough to everybody, because everything gets lumped into a term called carbon pricing, and everyone is for carbon pricing, but what that means to some people versus another, that means different things to different people. And I fear that people like John Kerry, for example, is going to go to Glasgow and push for carbon markets, trading markets like the EU ETS, and you get the hedge funds and the speculators in there, and it just becomes a mess.
Yeah.
And it's all carbon pricing. So everyone's for carbon pricing. We need to cut through that with the wisdom of Janet Yellen, for example, who's for carbon tax. They're not the same. And there's just a lot of muddied thinking going on out there in what I'm reading.
So I guess another thing to think of, though, even with the carbon tax, is once the price gets high enough, it is cheaper just to pull carbon out of the air than to stop like running some carbon emitting fuel plant. So some progressives are fundamentally opposed to that situation, but that's at a pretty high level of carbon price. I mean, like once it gets above $100 a ton, it's cheaper to pull carbon out of the air than to stop emitting.
Yeah, with what? With what technology?
Direct air capture that exists like now, and it's only going to get better in time.
Well, let them do it. Who cares? I mean, the important thing is to preserve the planet, and I think it's absolutely critical that CCL becomes solution neutral, and which is why I've always challenged anytime we do secondary asks or even now present support for this I forget what it's called, the agricultural stimulus bill kind of a thing, because it's one problematic solution that is really, it includes concepts of cap and trade into it, and has a lot of resistance from progressive communities, and so let's just focus on our main topic, and don't try and buy off conservatives or other political groups ahead of time with any other kinds of things. Let the free, let's set the the economics in place and let the market come up with whatever solutions happens to meet. But don't choose winners and losers.
I have to leave. Thanks for a good meeting. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Kid.
Hi, Jim.
And Jeff,
Yeah, I just want to bring up, I've started reading the book. I'm almost finished, Climate, the New Climate Wars by Michael Mann, who talks about the extent to which like Russian trolls and bots are going on the internet, posing as groups on the left and saying that they're against carbon pricing.
Wow.
So there may be a lot of thinking that certain groups don't want carbon pricing, and a lot of that might be Russian bots, literally. I mean, so he goes into detail about the fossil fuel interests have shifted their attack. They're no longer, or they're still talking about climate change, saying that it's not really happening, but they're losing that. So they're switching the attack to carbon pricing. That is the thing that is going to kill fossil fuels. So, we have to be aware, basically, that this attack is going on. And because everybody has a different view of climate change, all these different views, they're trying to drive wedges between groups. A lot of groups on the left, and just wedges wherever they can drive a wedge. I think Abbott is blaming this, outage on wind and solar, not being, so their attack is changing to, us, really. So we have to be aware of this.
Jeff Baker,
Yes.
can you put your email in the chat for me?
Yeah.
Contact you.
I'd like to respond to something said earlier. A carbon fee and dividend that returned 70% of the fee to the bottom 70% equally, or in another scheme with the IRS distributing it just the way they're doing the COVID payments, would easily survive the Byrd rule, because that is not revenue neutral. That generates revenue, and then the 30% would be spent by another part of the budget reconciliation bill on, worker transition, frontline communities, or whatever. So it would not be hard to have a carbon fee and dividend that was not revenue neutral to pass the budget reconciliation process. And I'd rather have a bipartisan bill too, but it's, I'm not sure we'll have that choice. Yes, David.
We've been meeting with Raul Grijalva, a very progressive member of Congress, and this trying to get him to support this bill. We go in and talk, and he's in favor of all the core values that we really are, but that regulatory pause, and also given dividends to the upper percentage of people, the same dividend was opposed. He would go along, he would be first in line, because he really appreciates the importance of climate change and carbon fees. But I'm really encouraged now. I'm looking forward to meeting with him. The last couple meetings, it was like running into a stone wall. You bring up the regulation, you try to explain it, and he'd say, "No, I don't want that." But this new way of looking at things, if CCL leadership can get this message out, I think that would lead to really progressive, really good meetings certainly with Representative Grijalva. I think he would come right along with those core values if you get rid of the fluff that's in there.
And I don't see how we'd lose any of our moderate Democrats either. I mean, there's nothing in making that change that any of them would not endorse it. And as we've all said, it's not bringing on the Republicans, and they can either sit on the sidelines, wait for a bill that has, almost surely of passage because we've got all the Democrats on board, and they're going to have to come on board to, you know, just to say that they're doing something, or maybe they try and seek some compromises then later. But fine, let them do it in the halls of Congress. We shouldn't do it by talking to one or two representatives who want to present a bill.
This is Peter. 2 weeks from tonight, Danny is presenting. And are we expecting him to sort of give us a new vision for our advocacy at that time? Is that when it's going to be publicly revealed to the membership?
I believe so, yes. That's what I'm sensing, and maybe it's just my perceptions, but from the multiple meetings that I've been to, that's where I think it's going, and that will be the time when we kind of get the call to action.
He is talking Saturday afternoon, although the Texas, the Third Coast Regional Conference was postponed. There's two others that were being held jointly, the Tornadoes and
Northeast.
And he is speaking at that, and any of us can sign up for it if we wish. We just have to go attend a regional group other than our own region.
Yeah, Appalachia is also, it's 3 of them this weekend.
California is the weekend after this coming, and I don't think Danny's on the agenda.
Yeah, Danny will be speaking at 2:45 Eastern time.
When?
At the 2:45 Eastern time. Here, I'm going to paste the agenda and the link for it into our chat.
Thank you. Well, I think during the last conference, when he spoke, he made it pretty clear that we were not likely to get our bill as it's written passed through Congress, and that, you know, we should be ready for that, and that, you know, as Bob was saying earlier, we have some limits that it has to protect the bottom 40%, and it has to, you know, put a rising price on carbon. So I think, you know, we can go in with that message. Maybe, you know, he was already saying, you know, just make it simple. The carbon pricing with the dividend, you know, doesn't have to be, and the border adjustment is probably gonna be in there, I think.
And that's pretty much what we did in our last meeting with Pramila Jayapal and with her aide, who is very knowledgeable with environmental issues. And it was a great meeting. It was really fun. Oh.
Sure. Also, the Jeff Baker's the liaison, but the staffer we met with also said she thinks it's going to have strong targets towards carbon reductions of emissions that are enforceable. We do have targets that are enforceable, but right now they are 0% by 2025 and only something like 30% by 2030. Even though the models say it will do better than that, that's an area that I think many progressives will balk at. They say that's not enough. This is our one shot to get something passed. It's got to do the job. And so I'm hoping that in committee, if not upon introduction, we will strengthen those targets. And then of course the bill ups the fee, and if necessary will impose regulations to make sure it hits those targets.
I have a question for you guys locally. Are you hearing in this Texas and Midwest disaster about why this is happening in terms of the warming Arctic?
Oh, and we need to get
polar
that
vortex.
Oh yeah.
I'm not hearing much on the.
I read all about it. Yes. The reason it happened is Texas wants cheap energy. They are far enough south that they do not winterize their natural gas plants or their windmills, even though several have said we need to. And as a consequence, there were pieces of both that froze, that literally froze, including the delivery of natural gas. They could not deliver sufficient natural gas to run the plants that were operating. And 50% of the natural gas and nuclear and coal couldn't run, even though they were trying to. I know that they flew in experts and workers from around the country into West Texas to manually unfreeze a bunch of stuff to try to get the natural gas flowing again. But that was the cause. Solar outperformed expectations, and the wind, 50% of our windmills were on scheduled down, and the other 50% did not perform well, but most of it was natural gas.
Well,
I would like
amazing. But the other part of my question is, are the people learning that the reason it's so cold is possibly because the Arctic is too warm and the jet stream is out of whack? Is that coming across at all?
No, I don't think that is coming across. I've of course been paying attention to that, but that is a critical message that we have to take, that
I have read that in a number of places.
have you? Well, good.
No, I think it's true.
Other
But
element I think to include in this discussion is that Texas chose not to join the FERC requirements to be part of a larger distribution district. I mean, the whole United States, other than Texas, is divided into two zones for the electrical grid. Texas said, we don't need to do this. We're self-sustaining. We're going to do it on our own. So they withdrew themselves from federal regulation in order to maintain the security of their system. And then, of course, being Republican controlled, didn't impose the necessary regulations to maintain its strength, and hence it went down. And so that's sort of the other part of the piece.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true, Tom. Even worse, when there are regulations, they rarely enforce them against fossil fuel companies.
I was pleased to learn what ERCOT stands for today. It's kind of a joke.
What?
It stands for Energy Reliability Council of Texas.
Oh, FERC. Well, FERC goes back
ERCOT.
to the 70s. I mean, that was the initial attempt under the interstate commerce clause of the Constitution that requires, if you're shipping energy in or out of the state, you have to meet those standards. But Texas said, screw you guys, we're going to do it on our own. So they're paying for it.
But ERCOT is good branding.
Okay, thanks for the good discussion. Good night.
Yeah, good night.
Okay.
This really has been a good discussion.
Indeed.
Very encouraging group of people.
Well, we're on the front line.
That's right. Well,